Hello and welcome to today's Explainer. We are about to embark on a truly fascinating historical journey, diving deep into the origins of a monumental piece of 19th century text, the Book of Mormon. Now, whether you're a skeptic, a firm believer, or maybe just a curious history buff, we're going to take a completely objective look at what the historical sources and artifacts actually tell us. We'll be examining the timeline, the literal physical mechanics of the translation, and the surviving relics that you can still see today, relying entirely on the primary source texts.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our chronological roadmap for today. First, we'll cover the 1820s claims of visions and golden plates. Second, the mechanics of how the translation worked. Third, the scribes and the major setbacks they faced. Fourth, we'll address some common questions. And finally, we'll look at the 21st century document preservation of the surviving manuscript.
All right, starting right off with Section 1, Visions and Golden Plates. We need to head back to the early 19th century to properly set the historical stage here.
So Joseph Smith reported a highly specific timeline of events. It kicks off in 1820 with the first vision he claimed to have had as a teenager living in upstate New York. That's followed up by a reported visit from an angel named Moroni in 1823. By 1827, he says he officially received the ancient golden plates, and then, remarkably, by 1829, a nearly 500-page book is fully translated. I mean, we are tracking a wildly rapid progression here, from an obscure, everyday farm boy to the dictation of a massive religious text, all in under a single decade.
And to really grasp the magnitude of this task, you have to consider his background. His wife, Emma Smith, highlighted this stark contrast beautifully. She stated, "He could neither write nor dictate a coherent and well-worded letter, let alone dictating a book like the Book of Mormon. You know, he had very limited formal education, which makes the sheer volume and the complexity of this translation a massive, undeniable historical curiosity."
Which naturally leads us right into Section 2, the mechanics of translation. The source texts actually provide us with highly specific, physical details about what was literally going on in that room.
Joseph and his close associates reported using physical instruments to help with the translation, and they actually used them interchangeably. There were two main aids. First, the Urim and Thummim, which they described as two clear stones bound together with a metal rim found alongside the plates, and second, a seer stone, which was a single oval-shaped stone that Joseph had actually found years earlier. Both were viewed as tangible tools meant to facilitate the English translation of the text.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it contextualizes these instruments. To a modern audience, using a seer stone probably sounds pretty unusual, right? But using physical objects to access or channel divine power has deep biblical precedence. Think about the rod of Aaron, the Ark of the Covenant, holy anointing oils, or when Jesus literally mixed dirt with his saliva to heal a blind man. Showing these historical precedents helps us understand that for a 19th century audience, these physical translation aids were deeply familiar religious concepts.
So what did this actually look like in practice? Well, Emma Smith completely demystifies the mechanics for us. She described Joseph sitting with his face buried in his hat, with the stone in it, and dictating hour after hour with nothing between us. Essentially, he placed the stone in a hat to block out the ambient light. And here's the kicker. Emma explicitly noted that he dictated aloud without relying on any hidden notes, manuscripts, or books, often picking up exactly where he left off after meals without missing a single beat.
But honestly, perhaps the most startling data point in this entire historical record is the speed. The vast majority of this massive dictation was completed in roughly 65 working days between April and June of 1829. And this brilliantly illustrates just how insanely fast that pace actually was. Translating a 500-page book in 65 days means Joseph was dictating an astonishing average of 8 pages every single day. To maintain that kind of output, especially without referencing a single note, is just a staggering volume of verbal dictation.
Okay, let's move into Section 3, Scribes and Setbacks. Because this absolutely was not a solitary endeavor, and they faced some pretty major hurdles along the way.
The biggest setback hit in the summer of 1828. Martin Harris, who was an early scribe for the project, took the first 116 translated pages to show his family. And in what literally has to be history's most stressful case of a misplaced assignment, the manuscript was either entirely lost or stolen. It was a devastating blow. As a result, Joseph experienced a temporary loss of his translation abilities, and the work just came to a complete halt.
Fortunately for the project, a young schoolteacher named Oliver Cowdery arrived in the spring of 1829. He stepped in as the principal scribe and ended up recording the vast majority of the text. Cowdery was a deep believer in the divine nature of the process. He later reflected, saying, "These were days never to be forgotten, to sit under the sound of a voice dictated by the inspiration of heaven." Together, he and Joseph hit that rapid-fire pace and finally finished the manuscript.
Which brings us to Section 4, addressing common questions. A history this complex naturally raises some eyebrows. It brings up questions for both skeptics and believers alike, so let's unpack a few of those.
Let's tackle the real elephant in the room first. If the translation process was completely divine, why are there thousands of changes in the modern editions of the Book of Mormon?
To answer that, we just have to trace the physical life cycle of a 19th century text. It all started with rapid verbal dictation where spelling absolutely wasn't standardized. Then, that raw manuscript had to be painstakingly copied by hand for the printer, which inevitably invited transcription errors. Next up was typesetting. The printer actually had to manually guess and add all the punctuation because the original dictated text didn't have any. So the later refinements in modern editions are mostly just corrections of those very human, mechanical errors.
Let's move to and see how this builds a case for human error entering the printing process. Because spelling was so phonetic and unstandardized back then, a scribe actually spelled the phrase "were sorrowful" as W-A-R-S-A-R-R-F-U-L. And in another instance, a typesetter simply misread the handwriting and accidentally changed the word joy to foes. When you look at modern edits, they are primarily just adjustments fixing these exact, tangible transcription mistakes.
Another major, super common question from the sources is about the final location of the physical artifacts themselves. Basically, what happened to the original golden plates?
Well, according to Joseph Smith's 1838 history, once the translation was fully complete, he stated that he delivered the plates back to the messenger, the angel Moroni. But importantly, before that happened, 11 different men signed official testimonies. 3 of them claimed to have been shown the plates by an angel, and a separate group of 8 witnesses testified that they physically handled and verified the heavy metal plates themselves. And those signatures, they remain printed in every single copy to this day. And finally, let's explore Section 5, the surviving original manuscript. This brings our historical journey all the way up to present-day preservation efforts.
Recently, the Church Historians Press released an absolute landmark publication. It's the very first complete photographic record of what still remains of the original 1829 manuscript. This massive volume features incredible high-resolution color photographs right alongside color-coded transcriptions of the earliest surviving dictation copy. It really brings readers as close as possible to the actual room where Joseph and Oliver worked.
So, the crucial point is just how rare these surviving pages actually are. Out of nearly 500 original pages, only 232 survive today, meaning 268 pages were completely destroyed over the years. When you do the math, only about 28% of that original dictated manuscript actually made it to the 21st century.
And the loss of those other pages? It isn't some profound historical mystery. Actually, it's just a tragic irony. Decades after the translation, the original manuscript was placed inside the cornerstone of a building called the Nauvoo House, specifically to preserve it for future generations. Unfortunately, over a period of 40 years, severe water seepage penetrated the stone. By the time it was finally extracted, the dampness had completely destroyed the vast majority of the pages.
So, we've traced the entire timeline. We've looked at the stones, the hats, the scribes, and the surviving fragments. With 232 original pages surviving today, how does analyzing this physical 1829 relic shape our understanding of 19th century religious history? It really is an incredible journey from a seer stone and a hat to meticulously preserved manuscript fragments. I hope this explainer has sparked your curiosity to look a little closer at the artifacts and records of the past and to consider how they shape the historical narratives we study today. Thank you so much for joining me, and keep learning.